My name is Mike Hurst, and I'm the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Mississippi. I want to thank you all for being here today. Today, we're here for some good news for a change. First, we're excited to announce the award of more than $6 million in grants from the United States Department of Justice to various entities throughout Mississippi to address the ever-growing problem of domestic violence in our state. Let me run through those grants for you initially. First, the Mississippi Department of Health is receiving over $2.2 million to support law enforcement, prosecutors, victim service providers, and courts in working to help victims of domestic and sexual violence. Dr. Thomas Dobbs is here with us today, and thank you, Dr. Dobbs, for being here. We know you have a little bit more going on, so I appreciate it. We also are awarding over $2.1 million to the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians to fund a tribal prosecutor to pursue domestic violence, to bolster coordinated community responses to violence against women, to strengthen the tribal's criminal justice system, and to provide services specifically for sexual assault victims. I spoke with Choctaw Chief Cyrus Ben yesterday, and he apologizes for not being able to be here today, but he is very appreciative of these grant awards to address this significant problem. The Mississippi Coalition Against Domestic Violence is receiving over $150,000 to help coordinate victim services and training, and to collaborate with federal, state, and local entities across Mississippi. Director Wendy Mahoney with the Coalition is here. Thank you, Wendy, for being here today. The Mississippi Coalition Against Sexual Assault is also receiving grant awards of over $600,000 to address violence against women, not only on campuses throughout our state, but also to help with training and technical assistance to colleges and universities as well. And I don't know if I saw Director Johnson here, but I spoke with her a few days ago, and she was excited about these awards. The Care Lodge Domestic Violence Shelter in Meridian is receiving a grant of over $500,000 to provide transitional housing for domestic violence victims. And the Lodge's Director, Abby Miller, is here today. Abby, thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it. And finally, last but certainly not least, in the Northern District of Mississippi, Our House, Inc. in Greenville is receiving over $250,000 to provide services tailored to the needs of black survivors of sexual assault in rural areas. So I want to congratulate them on that award. Before I begin my substantive comments, I'd also like to recognize our partners who are here today, both behind the podium and, because of social distance rules, not behind the podium. Chad Lamar is the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Mississippi and needs no introduction. He is a lifelong federal prosecutor, a trusted confidant to me personally, and a valuable partner in the fight against domestic violence and other federal crimes here in the state of Mississippi. Suzanne Ratliff is the mother of Phoenicia Ratliff, a victim of domestic violence from Canton, Mississippi, whose life we are honoring today with the naming of the operation and initiative that will address domestic violence in our state. Thank you, Ms. Ratliff, for being here today. We also have Will McCrary, the Assistant Special Agent in charge. You can't miss Will back in the back. In case we need any security, he's here today. But ATF has taken a strong position to address, investigate, and bring cases of domestic violence to our office to prosecute, and we could not do our jobs without these men and women doing their jobs. So thank you, Will, for being here today. Marilyn Wall, never thought I'd say those words up here. The Deputy Attorney General for the Mississippi Attorney General's Office and a former federal prosecutor in this office, joins us today with her staff. Candace Gregory, way back in the back, who is the Director of Public Integrity Division. Patrick Mundy, whose knees are getting a little weak as he ages, who is the Director of Investigations for the Attorney General's Office, and Terry Gleason, who is the Director of Victims Assistance. with the Mississippi Attorney General's office. Thank you all for being here today. We also have up here the Byram Police Chief, Luke Thompson, who is not only the president of the Mississippi Chiefs of Police Association, but frankly is a leader in addressing domestic violence from a law enforcement perspective. And his department is at the forefront of fighting domestic violence with all the tools that are available nationally. He has brought those back home to Hinds County, and we appreciate, Chief, you being here today and helping us with this initiative. We're also honored to have Jenny Williams, former FBI special agent, supervisory special agent, probably a lot more titles within the FBI, but now is the director of the Mississippi Department of Homeland Security, and whose staff, and Jenny personally, has been instrumental in helping us to go through the numbers, go through the convictions, go through the data in order to address domestic violence through Operation Phoenicia. Thank you, Jenny, for being here today. Let me just say this, today's awards could not come quick enough. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience physical violence by their intimate partner at some point during their lifetime. About 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men experience some form of sexual assault during their lives. Intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and stalking affect over 10 million people each year. And sadly, as you all probably know, during the coronavirus pandemic, with school closures, shelter-in-place orders, the mounting stress from loss of jobs and other economic opportunities, many cities around our country have experienced an increase in calls and an increase in cases of domestic violence. And I would imagine we here in Mississippi are no different. These awards, therefore, are very timely. They're very necessary. They are essential in the work that these groups, these men and women that you have heard here today, in the work that they are doing to address this very, very serious topic. So I want to thank them. I want to thank them for all the work they have done, for all the work they are doing, and the work that they will do. And please know that we in the U.S. Attorney's Office stand ready, willing, and more than able to help you assist victims of domestic violence and to go after those abusers who perpetuate this crime. The second reason that I personally, as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, want to speak with you today is about a new initiative we are going to announce in the Southern District. Last year, I continually heard the mayor of the city of Jackson state that the escalating murders here in our capital city were caused or were a result of domestic violence or interpersonal relationships. So it got me to thinking, and I called the chief of police for Jackson last year and said, hey, we want to do something in the U.S. Attorney's Office to try to get at that issue, to try to get at the root of these murders and try to prevent these murders before they happen. And in digging into the issue more, I learned that the presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. 500%. And that intimate partner violence accounts for almost 15% of all violent crimes. On a typical day, domestic violence hotlines receive approximately 21,000 phone calls. 21,000, which is an average of about 15 calls every single minute. So I knew we had to act. Today's initiative that we are announcing will be called Operation Phoenicia, in honor of a local young lady named Phoenicia Ratliff from Canton, Mississippi, who lost her life to domestic violence just a few short months ago. And again, I want to thank her mom, Suzanne Ratliff, for being here today, and who has graciously agreed to allow us to honor her daughter in the naming of this operation, in the hopes of saving lives and preventing further harm from domestic violence in the future. I never got the chance to meet Phoenicia. I really wish I would have, as everything I've heard and learned about her tells me that she was a very special person. Described by our family and friends as delightful, good as gold, a wonderful person with an angelic smile and a caring soul, always positive, and a peacemaker. Phoenicia was a full-time student in her senior year at Jackson State University, getting ready to graduate in December, working 2 jobs and trying to raise her little baby girl, with her whole life ahead of her when we lost her to domestic violence. On May 14th of this year, her ex-boyfriend, Jamarcus Black, shot Phoenicia's sister and kidnapped Phoenicia. A law enforcement chase ensued, and after a brief standoff, Black killed Phoenicia and then himself. It was reported that just a week earlier, Phoenicia had filed domestic violence and stalking charges against Black, including a temporary restraining order. Now, under federal criminal law, it's illegal for someone with a domestic violence restraining order to possess a firearm. It's also illegal for someone with even a misdemeanor conviction for domestic violence to possess a firearm. Those are both federal felonies, and those are both federal felonies you're going to see prosecuted much more in the coming days and weeks and months in the Southern District of Mississippi. We are going to do everything in our power in the future in honor of Phoenicia to ensure that we don't lose another young lady, a daughter, a sister, a mother. In honor of Phoenicia, we're working with our federal, state, and local law enforcement and our nonprofits, our courts, our other attorneys throughout the state to implement this Operation Phoenicia. And let me tell you what we're going to do. First, we are going to reprioritize the issue of domestic violence, putting those who illegally possess firearms while they have a restraining order for domestic violence or even a misdemeanor conviction for domestic violence at the top of our list for prosecuting in federal court. We are also going to do what I am calling call-ins. And what that means is we are scouring criminal histories, court documents, docket sheets, everything we can find in order to locate those with restraining orders or misdemeanor convictions of domestic violence, in order to call those individuals in to the United States Attorney's Office, put them on notice that they better not have a firearm, in the hopes of potentially deterring domestic violence in the future, or if they do possess a firearm, we will prosecute them, period. Again, I want to thank Jenny Williams and her department for helping in this, let me tell you, massive undertaking to look at all these documents, to collect, to analyze, to get this stuff in order so that we can do this. I also want to thank Paula Broom at the Mississippi Attorney General's Office, whose institutional knowledge and work on this has been invaluable. And I would be remiss not to thank our own federal prosecutors, specifically Chet Kirkham, who has been leading this process, Chris Wansley, who's the head of our violent crime initiative here in the office, and First Assistant U.S. Attorney Darren Lamar, who actually had the idea to come up with these call-ins. The third thing we're going to do is what I'm referring to as call-outs. We know in law enforcement that sometimes background checks don't come back quick enough, and someone with a misdemeanor conviction for domestic violence actually gets a firearm from a federal firearm licensed dealer. We're working with our partners at ATF, the FBI, in order to ensure that those individuals who have gotten those firearms and should not have them, that we go out to them, that we put them on notice and take those illegal firearms out of their possession, and to put the victims of that individual's domestic violence on notice that this individual is trying to get a firearm, to put our service providers here in this room and throughout the state on notice that these victims need services and need help. And by taking this holistic approach, we hope to deter more domestic violence through these call-outs. And finally, we have a monumental task ahead of us to educate, train, and raise awareness about domestic violence, not just amongst the general public to encourage victims to come forward, but frankly amongst our own attorneys in the legal community, our own law enforcement, our own local judges who probably don't know that these are federal crimes and that there are things that they can do to help us in prosecuting these criminals. Now, I think I said finally, but I'm going to say finally again. Finally. We have also heard from other U.S. attorneys' offices that sometimes there are regulatory or legislative fixes needed in the state. And I think that may be in the situation here in the state of Mississippi. So we're going to work with our legislators, with our regulators here in the state to make sure that state legislation reflects federal legislation so that we have the tools we need, we have the evidence we need in order to prosecute these individuals and not allow them to get off on some technicality. You see, as Chief Thompson has taught me, this is not only just an issue for safety of victims of domestic violence, this is an issue for law enforcement whose level of being injured or killed in responding to domestic violence increases exponentially. So let me conclude by saying we're only 2 weeks away from October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. But if you know me, I like to get a head start on things. So we're here today to raise the awareness before Domestic Violence Awareness Month. But I'm excited about these awards. I'm excited about these groups that have been awarded this money, what they're going to do with this money, and the partnerships we have developed and what we can do together going forward. Our work is just now beginning. Doing a press conference is the easy part. Now the real work comes. And I commit to you that in the future, you're going to see a whole heck of a lot more domestic violence prosecutions coming out of this office so that we can protect other victims and prevent domestic violence from escalating as it has in the last few weeks and months. So let me conclude by saying thank you for being here. I want to ask Ms. Ratliff if she wouldn't mind coming up here, saying a few words, and then we'll get to our other speakers. Ms. Ratliff, thank you again for being here.
Good morning. I would just like to say a few words about my daughter, Phoenicia. Phoenicia was a full-time student at Jackson State. While at Jackson State, she pledged her sorority of Zeta while she was carrying her unborn child, whom we later found out was a baby girl that she named Jordan. She worked 2 full-time jobs, while going to school and trying to take care of her baby. You never would have known that Phoenicia was going through anything because she hid all of her pain behind a big smile. She always carried a smile, regardless of what she was going through, which was a whole lot. And for me as a parent to see my child go through all the things that she went through was tough for me. Phoenicia was well loved. She was loved by pretty much anybody that came encounter with her. She left a place in their heart for her. But I want to say this to the people that may be going through a domestic situation. Please get out. At the first sign, get out. No matter how you may think a person will change, will not. It may start out verbally, end up physically. It doesn't get better. It only get worse. Get out. First signs, please get out.
Just turn to Lamar.
Thank you. Mike, first of all, I want to thank you for the kind words and thank everybody for being here. Thanks for including us in this. Mike and I have known each other for a while. Excuse me. As we were both assistant U.S. attorneys, me in the Northern District and Mike in the Southern District of Mississippi. When we first took these offices, Mike and I pledged to one another that we would take on issues jointly to do not what's best only for the Northern District or the Southern District, but what's best for the entire state. And by working together with our federal, state, and local partners, there's really no limit to what we can do. We just have to put our mind to it. We know that domestic violence has and continues to be a tremendous problem in American society. I talked about these collaborative efforts a little bit, and I didn't collaborate with Mike on the speech, so I'm going to not cite the same statistics that he just did. But it is a significant issue, and it's a significant issue with ladies and likewise with men, although the vast majority of the victims, we all know, are ladies. Also, in our Native American community, the statistics are even higher. A shocking 4 out of 5 American, Indian, and Alaskan Native women will experience some form of domestic violence during their lifetimes. While domestic violence affects both men and women, many of the murders that are committed in the United States are the result of domestic violence, as Mr. Hurst said earlier. But the impact on our children is so great. Those that abuse their intimate partners are more likely to abuse their children in their home. This has a significant impact on our children, both physically and psychologically. In November of 2019, President Trump established a task force on missing and murdered American Indians and Alaskan Natives that will help bring federal partners together to identify and investigate both current and cold cases involving female victims and to raise awareness about this issue. And we pledge our support to the tribe, the task force, and its goals. While domestic violence and violence against women is not a new problem for our society, I am heartened today to be here with my colleagues and to see commitment and the financial resources that have been awarded in 2020 to help address it. The fight against domestic violence and human trafficking remains a priority in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District, and obviously also likewise in the Southern District of Mississippi, to do what's best for the entire state. We appreciate your help in raising awareness in our state and our communities with this issue. And thank y'all.
Ms. Wall.
Good morning. Attorney General Fitch is sorry she cannot be here with you today for this exciting announcement about these grant awards. She's honored to be a part of this important partnership between federal, state, and local entities to protect and support victims of domestic violence. General Fitch asked me to share her statement with you today. Domestic violence affects millions of women and men every year. Last year alone, Mississippi law enforcement responded to more than 10,000 calls for service for domestic violence, including simple domestic violence, aggravated domestic violence, and stalking. The forced isolation of COVID-19 has made circumstances even worse for those who suffer domestic violence. Abusers already isolate their victims from support and help as a way to exercise control, and COVID-19 trapped victims in the very places they are most unsafe. With the increased stresses of job loss and uncertainty right now, abusers could have even more to take out on their victims. Domestic violence shelters and organizations that offer a support network for those victims are refuges in every sense of the word. And that's why these federal funds today are so vital. At the Attorney General's office, we are committed to support and protect victims, hold perpetrators accountable, and prevent violence before it starts. But we can't do it alone. Through the Mississippi Protective Order Registry housed at the Attorney General's office, we can work with federal partners like Assistant United States Attorney Hurst and U.S. Attorney Lamar, and state partners to proactively identify domestic violence offenders who are violating federal law by illegally possessing firearms. Through our training division, we offer important primers and refreshers to our criminal justice partners on investigating and prosecuting domestic violence cases, including through live actor recreations for new cadets at Melota. In fact, we have nearly 100 new prosecutors signed up for the new prosecutor training we're hosting this week. And our victim advocates are developing stronger relationships with the shelters, counselors, and other providers who offer direct assistance to domestic violence victims. Over the summer, through a partnership between the Attorney General's office and Uber, our victim advocates distributed more than 1,100 free codes to allow victims to get to safety, help shelters, counselors, and others extending their limited funds. Each of us has a duty to speak out against this deeply destructive abuse and advocate on behalf of those who have been assaulted at home. We also acknowledge the hard work of the many advocates, clergy, service providers, healthcare providers, educators, law enforcement officers, family members, and friends who have provided hope and healing to those who have suffered at the hands of a domestic violence abuser. I applaud these organizations for their dedication to helping domestic violence victims. And I want to thank President Trump and Attorney General Barr for making these funds available to aid them in their mission. Thank you. At this time, I will yield the podium to Chief Thompson.
Thank you. First, to U.S. Attorney Hurst, thank you for taking this issue up, and thank you for your kind words earlier. To Ms. Ratliff, Phoenicia deserves better, and your experience is incredibly important here in keeping Phoenicia's memory alive, and we will move forward to honor her in our efforts to continue to fight domestic violence. Domestic violence is one of the greatest public safety issues local law enforcement face right now. We've seen the connection in the statements already with some statistics. We've seen the connections between domestic violence and child abuse. But what's not been stated is that many people that assault and kill police officers have domestic violence in their history. The information suggests that many of our mass shooters in our country have domestic violence in their history. This is not an issue that law enforcement can do alone. Early intervention by victim specialists is absolutely needed, and one of the things that we've done is we've started to institute tools and create partnerships with service providers that gets victim services as early as we can. It's incredibly important that we involve as many partners as we can because we're going to keep police officers alive. You see it around the country. If a police officer can't keep himself safe, he can't keep the community safe. And it's incredibly important. I'm so thankful that our U.S. Attorney's Office has taken up this matter and that we can move forward training our police officers better and in better tactics and better tools to keep their community safe. Because when the community is safe, we're all safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Ms. Mahoney, anybody else want to speak? Dr. Dodds? Please, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, sir. And I'll be brief, but I'll just say real quickly, thank you again for your efforts and for this additional funding. The Department of Health has been fortunate to be able to assist with domestic violence through the Office Against Interpersonal Violence. For the past 5 years or so, we've been responsible for distributing grants and support to the real heroes, to local law enforcement, to the prosecutors, but also to the local service providers who fight domestic violence, sexual assaults, and provide safe haven for victims. And so we just want to really reiterate that those are the real heroes out there. And within almost every community or near every community, there is a location where help is available. So if you are a victim, please reach out. There's a safe place for you to go. And I would just like to say that as part of my role and the leadership of the Department of Health, we are committed to accountability for the money, but also to efficiently distribute it to those who need it. And so know that over the past several years, we've invested a lot of our time trying to make sure that the Office Against Interpersonal Violence was accountable and trying to make sure that we get the funds, the support to the field, to locations where the good work is being done. Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dodds. Yeah, please, Ms. Mahoney.
Good morning. I'm just honored as the Executive Director for the Mississippi Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I'm honored to be here today. I thank Ms. Ratliff for her story, but more than anything, I'm thankful for the collaboration, because there's no way to combat domestic violence without all of us together on one accord to deal with an issue that is far-reaching our community than most people even think or realize. It's real. It's happening. And when we see it in the media is one thing, and I appreciate honoring Phoenicia, but how many more Phoenicias are out there? How many more potential Phoenicias are out there? And it is a wonderful thing for us to come together to be able to deal with this issue. And so as an organization that represents the domestic violence shelter programs in our state and supporting all these efforts, I want to say thank you, thank you, and thank you, and thank you. It's just an honor. And so we have much work to do. This is the beginning. And also knowing that next month is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Getting the information out there, letting people know that where there is help, there is hope. Where there is hope, there is help. So we have the resources. We just need to get them to the people. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Dobbs, Heather Wagner has been instrumental. Even though she's no longer with the Mississippi Department of Health, she is actually still working and helping, and this is a lifelong endeavor for her, so thank you for that. Any questions from the media?
Yes, as far as here in Mississippi goes, how widespread is this? I know y'all talked a bit more like national statistics. Do y'all have any data about Mississippi specifically?
Ms. Wall, you had the state statistics. Why don't you address that?
I think last year alone, there were over 10,000 calls for Mississippi law enforcement officers to respond to domestic violence calls.
You spoke to the idea of the collaboration here, but how important is it? Not every case is hopefully not going to make it to your office or to even the local level. So how important is it that it's not just those who make it there, but like you said, at the crisis and the center level, to be able to stop before it reaches that?
I think, and Ms. Mahoney, you can address this, but I'm going to be frank with you. I think what Ms. Mahoney, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Miller, I think what these individuals are doing in the nonprofits are probably even more important than what we are doing in law enforcement. Because, as Ms. Ratliff pointed out, many times victims don't come forward to law enforcement. Many times victims don't trust law enforcement. So we in law enforcement have a high hill to climb in order to regain that trust, to show them that we are capable of protecting them and going after abusers. So yeah, I think your point is well taken, Courtney Ann, that our nonprofits are the ones that we have to support because they are the front line. They are the true first responders when it comes to addressing domestic violence. But I'm excited about these grants because it gives them more resources to do that, and it connects us with them in order to help them maybe where they have gaps and maybe where we have gaps.
Mike, may I speak to that?
Yes, please.
To speak directly to that question, nationally, only about 3% of victims that come to the attention of law enforcement are connected to victim services. And that's one of the things that we're focused on in our department is an early intervention and an early connection. Law enforcement encounters victims of domestic violence. The sooner that law enforcement officers make that connection to the local service provider, the better that the victim is, the better, because these service providers also provide offender services too. So the sooner we make that connection, the sooner the family unit gets services and it makes the whole instance safer. So there's the trick, is that we have to train our law enforcement officers in the risk assessment tools that are already available to make sure that a police officer that responds to a domestic violence incident knows the very specific questions to ask and knows to make a phone call. And the law enforcement officer can make that phone call from the scene and connect that victim to services. And we've seen great success in our city doing just that.
It can't just be the call and that's the end, or a charge and that's the end.
Correct. No, there's my mantra to law enforcement has been ask 12 questions in 3.5 minutes and make one phone call. We're not asking police officers to provide these services. We're simply asking officers to make the connection, and there are tools available that help the officers in making those decisions. It's not an arbitrary decision.
Wendy, can you speak to how the additional money will help a little bit more specifically? What types of ways that this grant money may be used at that service level providers?
Okay, well, one of the things that our monies we've earmarked to go in various communities and do coordinated community response teams. And that is working with law enforcement and all of the local agencies and organizations so that they have a better understanding of what domestic violence is, what it is not, where the resources are, and then having appropriate responses to domestic violence as well. So that's one of the things that we earmark the money for, because it does happen in the community. And making sure that we have a coordinated community response team that does not leave anybody out in that particular community. It could be a faith-based leader, it could be a child care center director. So we're looking at various entities and ways of doing even community mapping, looking at mapping out the community, what's there, what isn't there, and bringing those people to the table. We've done it historically as multidisciplinary teams, but on the DV and sexual assault and stalking side, it's called coordinated community responses, and is looking at what is our response to DV in our community, and making sure that we have all the entities at the table. So that's one way that the money is helping, so that we can have this collaborative, coordinated effort.
Question follow-up. Whenever you're talking with people, how do you help them define domestic violence? What is the range that people can look for in their lives so they can reach out to an organization like yourselves?
Well, first of all, people need to understand that domestic violence is a pattern of behavior. Okay? It's a pattern of coercive behavior. And that coercion, if you're in a relationship and someone uses their power and control within that relationship and they're coercing you to do something, humiliate, degrade, demean you, then there is a strong possibility that it is domestic violence. And that they understand most time it starts small. It can be emotional, degrading and demeaning. And so if those things are happening, you need to reach out to someone and have a conversation and get the support you need. And one thing I tell people don't really understand, our shelter, we call them programs. They're not just about sheltering. They're about having resources in place in order to help those individuals who need it most, whether it's counseling, just helping process, safety planning. Because what happens is when an individual gets ready to leave an abusive relationship, most times, on average, they're going to try 7 to 8 times before they even are successful in leaving. So our shelter programs assist in providing information and resources for safety planning. You need to plan to exit. And you need the resources and empowerment. If someone has demeaned and degraded you so much, you don't always have the power to get out of it or leave successfully. So our programs and resources are there to help those individuals do that as well. Thank you.
Anybody else?
One more for Dr. Dobbs.
Yeah.
Can you talk about sexual violence, domestic violence in terms as like a public health crisis?
Yeah, so there's so many things to that are true. Certainly within this coronavirus context, we have seen a significant increase nationwide in domestic violence, interpersonal violence. We've seen the murder rate in Jackson has increased a lot recently. So it is having a major impact with the coronavirus situation. But also if we think about, in general, from a public health impact, anything that degrades health, certainly the violence piece and the death, and then the disability that results in a lack of productivity and healthy lifestyles. So it's just really one of those basically social determinants of health. It's one of those foundational concepts that if we think about, sorry to get into this, Maslow's hierarchy of need, what's the second one, right? It's safety. If you don't have those fundamental components within your life, you can't achieve health. So it is a core public health issue. Thanks.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it.